Okay, welcome everybody tonight. My name is Roxanne and I'm very, very excited to be hosting my first webinar with you guys today in my role as online organizer for the OHS unit. Now, I'm even more excited to be having Renata here to join me, Renata Musolino, to share her OHS wisdom with us all and to answer any burning questions we may have at the end. So welcome, Renata.
Thank you, Roxanne. Hello, everyone.
Now, just a reminder, this is going to cut out in 40 minutes, so we will try to keep it short and to hold all your questions up at the end. So please feel free to type your little questions in the chat box and we'll get to that in the end. But for the meantime, I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. Okay, and we will get this started. Okay, so we have the goals for the webinar this evening. The first one, of course, is to leave knowing what the new regulations are and how to cite them. The second goal is to feel confident knowing what will remain the same in the new regulations and what you still need to remember, even if it hasn't changed or very important. And the third one is to understand how these changes will improve and will affect your role at the workplace. So having said that, the value of knowing the OHS regulations is extremely important, as there's been 2 deaths this week in Victoria and 2 last week. We do understand the value OHS in the workplace has. So thank you all for participating in this webinar to understand the new regulations.
Okay, so this session is actually going to be pretty full. So firstly, we'll be looking at the brief history of the OHS regulations. Why were they changed? Who's affected by these changes? Importantly, what hasn't changed? Clearly what has changed, and we'll be looking at only part of it. This is part 1, we will be doing a part 2. And today we'll be looking at some of the admin changes, the changes to the manual handling chapter, the high-risk work chapter, and the hazardous substances chapter. And then there will hopefully be some time to look at some questions. Okay, so a brief history of the OHS regulations. Now, for those of you who have been in health and safety for a long time, you'll know that our legislation is sort of rooted in the UK Robins model. Robins said there should be a statutory duty on every employer to consult with employees or their representatives at the workplace on measures for promoting health and safety at work and to provide for the participation of employees in the development of such measures. So historically, that's where our legislation comes from. The Robins report was done in the 70s. It was pushed by labour unions in the UK. It was introduced by a Labor government. It became ACTU and union policy in the 70s in Australia. And as Labor governments came to power in Australia, we adopted this legislation. In Victoria, it was in 1985. So that's basically what it is, our Health and Safety Act. We had regulations under the previous Act, but they were all individual. When the Act was reviewed in 2003, we've got a new Act in 2004, the regulations were consolidated into one document. Now, unlike an Act of Parliament, which has to be remade by Parliament, and that's what happened with the 85 Act, regulations have what we call a sunset period. So they have to be remade every 10 years, and that's why they were changed. So,
all right.
I went on to yours.
That's all right. That's all right. So just to add on to what Renata was saying, under the Subordinate Legislation Act in 1994, it requires all regulations to be renewed every 10 years. And WorkSafe is responsible for reviewing and remaking those regulations by this date. And so the old OHS regulations did expire on the 17th of June, hence the new ones came into effect on the 18th, so last Sunday.
Should say too that in fact, of course, the drafts went out for public comment. We participated as unions, as did the employers, in going through the changes. And one of the things that was decided was that there should be more consistency with the model regulations. So who's affected by them? Now, mainly the regulations are the same. There have been changes to the numbering system, so that's thrown us all out, as well as slight changes to the scope and the definition of some parts of the regs. In particular, if you work in a workplace where asbestos is present, are a manufacturer, importer or importing supplier of hazardous substances or ag-vet chemicals, if you work in construction or you operate a mine or a major hazard facility, you need to be aware of what the changes are. Now, they've been divided into two parts. As I said before, we'll only do part of it today.
Mm-hmm. And for the next part, we will get your opinions on what you think is a priority for us to cover as well. So stay tuned. Okay, so what hasn't changed? Now, the first thing to remember is that your consultation rights have not changed at all. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't still pay attention to them, because too many employers ignore them. So as you can see, we have the consultation rights under Chapter 2 in Part 2.1 of the new regulations. And important to remember here is that your employer is still required to consult with you about health and safety matters that may affect your designated work groups, your DWG, specifically when, number one, we have identifying or assessing hazards or risks. Number two, making decisions about control measures or facilities. Number three, procedures for resolving OHS issues. Number four, consulting with employees. Number five, monitoring health or workplace conditions. 6, we have providing information and training. 7, determining membership of the Health and Safety Committee. And lastly, proposing changes to the workplace, plant, substances, or conduct of work.
Which is super important.
Very important. So if you do want to find out more information, head to Chapter 2 in the new OHS Regulations and consult the General Duties section.
Okay, another really important part of regs that hasn't changed are the issue resolution procedures. Now, this is an area where there's a lot of problems, because what we know is that lots of workplaces don't have issue resolution procedures, so you should be following what's in the Act and the regs. And many places that do have them, actually they're not agreed. They're made by the employer, and they're not very consistent with what the law says. And in many cases, they seek to undermine the rights of health and safety reps to do things like cease work or issue a PIN or call the union or call the WorkSafe. So more importantly than anything else, have a look at what your issue resolution procedures are at the workplace and make sure they're consistent. Call your union or call us if you need help.
And just to find out more about it, just head to Part 2.2 of the General Duties in the new 2017 regulations, and specifically follow Part 2.2 all the way to Part 23, 24 and 25, and it just outlines all the procedures to follow if you are in a bit of a pickle. Okay, so what has changed? So first of all, as Renata mentioned before, there are some admin changes with the numbering. So each chapter has a separate numbering, and the regulations begin at Regulation 1 and end in Regulation 583. So previously we would have noise in Regulation 3.2.4 for control of exposure to noise, but now it will just be under Regulation 34. So we'll do our best throughout this to point out the new numbers, so just keep your eyes peeled. And the second part to mention is that the subdivisions covering duties of self-employed persons have been integrated into the subdivisions covering duties of employers. So keep an eye, if you do want to consult information for those self-employed, just remember it is under duties of employers as well.
Okay, so manual handling 3.1. So the manual handling is covered under Part 3.1 of the regs. It's the physical hazards section. As in all the regulations, the employer has a duty to identify the hazard and then take measures to control the risk, eliminate it if practicable, and then review the measures taken to control. The real issue with this section of the regs is that employers very rarely comply with it. So there are some changes, but the real issue for workers and health and safety reps is that there is very little compliance. Now, this is despite the fact that hazardous manual handling claims are the biggest compensable single one item. In 2015-16, 38% of all claims in Victoria were caused by body stressing, and musculoskeletal injuries accounted for 34% of the claims. The problem too is that unlike, you know, when someone gets a bit of their body chopped off, there's very little compliance activity from WorkSafe to ensure that employers are implementing this part of the regs. It's a process matter. So that's what you need to keep in mind.
Okay, so one of the first things to point out is that the title of manual handling has changed. So previously, and I'm just going to show you here with a little spotlight here. In the old version, we had manual handling under physical hazards. In the new version, it is now called hazardous manual handling. And the idea was to ensure that the whole part applies to everything under the definition of hazardous manual handling as well as normal manual handling. So we can see that's now hazardous manual handling. All right. So the next piece, the definition. Did you want to cover that?
Yep. So the definition has changed slightly. I know that there was a lot of debate about changing the definition and changing manual handling to hazardous manual handling. And I think part of it is to say, well, firstly, some things have come out, so we no longer have repetitive.
So yeah, as you can see, repetitive has been taken. Oh,
oops. Yep. So repetitive has been taken out from A part 3, part 2, and the word sustained has been removed from A part 3. So you'll see there that I think what they've tried to do is firstly be a bit more consistent with the model definition, and secondly make it really clear that by having repetitive or sustained, it could be a bit confusing. So they sought to change the definition to clarify it.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that they did do was they combined the previous definition of object with the new definition of hazardous manual handling. So you can see here it also refers to objects such as a thing involved in work.
Yeah, I think part of the issue was that they said there was no definition for object, which is a bit weird. Yeah. So the thing is an object. But
apparently they needed a definition. Yeah. All right, so there's also been a couple of changes to what is required for hazard identification and review of controls. And I guess the first one here is that the word task has been removed from the new regulations, as it was not quite defined in the old ones. So to ensure clarity, the new regulations refer to all work undertaken by an employee that is hazardous manual handling. And as you can see, hazardous manual handling has now been renumbered to Regulation 26 in the new regulations.
Okay, the other thing that they've done is that they've removed this concept, which we were never very happy with, that a general assessment could be done, a general hazard ID could be done on a class of tasks rather than an individual task. Now, they've said that this is, you know, it doesn't prevent employers actually doing it if people doing the same sort of thing in the same sort of situation, in the same situation, and everything's more or less the same. But please be aware that while they've removed it under the manual handling, hazardous manual handling chapter, they haven't removed it everywhere in the regs. So there are other parts of the regs where employers can do these generic sort of assessments or identifications.
Yes, but specifically for hazardous manual handling, it has been removed. Okay, and then lastly, we just have a little section here under review of risk control measures that has been removed in the new regulations. So this was just removed because Part B here, if you can have a read, it requires the employer to know when an employee is using an object for another purpose before they actually do that in order to review the risk control measures. So that's quite complicated because obviously the employer isn't going to know what's in the mind of most employees, and they're also not going to know how an object is going to be used for another purpose. So,
yeah, except I would have argued that it's not when an employee uses something for the other purpose, but where an employer actually purchases something and says, "Here, use this for this purpose."
Right.
So I guess the issue would be there that I mean, the concept is that something should only be used for the purpose for which it is designed. But when we get into, well, why are people not using it for that purpose, for another purpose, I think it's a bit of an argument. Is it the employee who said that, or is it the employer?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. Valid point. And just to add to that, this has also been, is now renumbered as Regulation 28 for the new regulations as well.
Okay, high-risk work, 3.6. Now, this is also physical hazards. Most of what we'll cover in this section has to do with licences for high-risk work.
Okay. So, sorry. So we'll get to the technical changes in this section in a moment. But the major health and safety question you guys should ask here is in relation to the licences. For example, does a person carrying out this work have a valid licence? Is your employer allowing someone to carry out this work without a valid licence? So to find out more on the requirements of a valid high-risk licence, please consult Division 1 of Part 3.6. As you can see here, the requirements to be licensed. And so this screen capture here is taken from the new regulations, so all the numbering is correct on the pages as well as the regulation numbering as well. All right.
Okay, the other thing too that I think health and safety reps and other workers need to be aware of is, as Roxy just said, is the person licensed? Mm-hmm. The only time that a person might be operating a piece of equipment or working in a particular area where a licence is required and they're not licensed is where they are under training. Now, generally speaking, if someone is in training, the regs say that person has to be under direct supervision and that the person conducting the training must be supervising. So this is the important thing. One of the issues that we've had in many workplaces is people will say, oh, just get up and drive that forklift and, you don't really need a licence. And then if they're asked about it, say, oh, the person's in training. I remember having someone ring me and say, we've had someone who's been in training for over a year. Well, that's not the case. The regs say that someone should be in training until such time as they are competent and then get their licence. So they're the questions that I would be asking.
So just, make sure you consult this section 2, Division 2.
Numbers 132 and 133.
Okay, and following on from this, the person should still be assessed for competency to receive their licence. So again, consult Division 3, Assessments of Competency, for more information on how to obtain this. And it will cover, again, methods of assessment, instructions on assessing, and the process for reassessment if need be.
And remember too, the assessment of competency has to be done formally. It's by a registered assessor. In fact, talking about assessors, the regs have been specifically varied to allow the authority to impose specific terms and conditions when authorising a person to carry out these assessments of competency. Now, those of you who work in the area may remember that there was quite a scandal in some jurisdictions, not so much Victoria, but certainly it's always possible, where it was found that people were getting assessed as competent by these authorised assessors and they were not in fact competent. So that obviously creates a huge health and safety risk. Imagine a crane driver getting a certificate of competency when the person is not competent and the damage that could cause. So that's why this is unimaginable.
So just make sure you're aware of this part, and the new regulation for this is numbered at 139. So just take note. Okay. So high-risk work licence classes, Schedule 3. So this part of the new regulations, it regulates what work is required for the what work requires the operator to hold a license for. So a high-risk work license means any of the licenses listed in Schedule 3.
Oh, can I just add here that the schedules are at the back of the regulations.
Yes.
Now, the schedules were also in the old regs, but the numbering has changed, and schedules are more easily changed than regs are. So you can, the government can actually vary some schedules.
Right.
And it's at the back where you can look up and say, well, does this job need a license?
Yeah. So yeah, it's quite easy to find if you just check out the index at the back, of course. So yeah, this the entire section of Schedule 3 will just basically describe the scope of the license and its exclusions. So these are Part 1 covers license classes for scaffolding and rigging. Part 2 is license classes for crane, hoist and forklift truck operation. And Part 3 is license classes for pressure equipment operation. Okay, so a couple of changes to the requirements and scope of the following licenses have taken place.
Okay, so dogging. I always laugh when I hear that.
Great
because dogging license. Instead of having the definition of dogging license separate to the scope in the old regs, the new regs now incorporates both by specifically referencing dogging work.
Okay, yeah.
Now, don't ask me what that means. I don't actually understand it.
Reading the definitions for it complicates it more, but I'm assuming you would know if you're a dogging worker. But yeah, just take note that it has changed. The definitions changed to number 4 as well. And as you can see, the difference with the new regulations from the old to the new. Okay. The second part to mention here is that changes to the definition. They've changed it to provide further clarity, essentially, as well. So the definition section is also in the old regulations. It was right underneath this part. In the regulations, it would be under the heading right here. But in the new regulations, all the definitions are in one section in the chapter, the preliminary chapter, and it just basically has introductory matters here, definitions, and underneath that you'll find the dogging work definition. It's quite similar, but it's just been split up into 2 to provide more clarity. So yeah, just make sure Chapter 1, Part 1.1 for all those definition changes.
Okay, there have been some changes to order picking forklift license. Now, this in fact may be quite important for many workplaces because the scope has changed. So in the new regulations, a license is only required for picking forklift license if the forklift truck can be raised 900 millimetres or more above the ground. So in other words, if someone is operating a forklift truck that lifts less than 900 millimetres, which is just under a metre, then that person does not need to hold a licence anymore. So I guess it's to ensure that little forklift trucks that aren't going to be creating a risk of loads falling, people don't have to be licensed anymore. Now that will in some way free things up in some workplaces.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Okay. And again, there is a new license class for reach stackers now. So in the old regulation, operators of a reach stacker had to cover all the competencies required for a non-slewing mobile crane operation license. But in the new regulations, a new license class has been given to reach stackers, and that's under item 19. And it allows the operators to receive a license for operating reach stackers without having to cover the competencies of the non-slewing mobile crane license. So very specific and niche to this kind of operation. And those that currently do hold a mobile crane license can still continue to operate a reach stacker as per usual.
Okay, the next one is very similar to the one I previously spoke about, and it is again that 900 millimetre. So a forklift truck, a low lift forklift pallet truck, an operator no longer needs a licence for that either. And again, that I don't know why they use 900. I guess it was an agreement. And it might be that a whole class of forklift pallet trucks and other similar equipment only goes to 900. And so they've decided that obviously the risk associated with that is low enough to say you don't need a licence.
Right. changes to crane operation license. So the scope of a vehicle loading crane operation has changed, first of all, from item 15 to item 13 in the regulations. Let's go back here. In the new regulations, the scope has been expanded to include the application of load estimation and slinging techniques to move a load with a vehicle loading crane, as you can see here. All right.
And boiler operation licence changed to that. Now, under the previous regs, which is what we've got up here at the moment, you had a hierarchical system with 3 different types of licence classes: basic, intermediate and advanced, with some descriptions. In the new regs, we now have 2, so it's been simplified. You have standard and advanced, and the definitions are there. So if you're a boiler operator or if there's a boiler in your workplace, check this out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And speaking of, for boilers, under Schedule 4, pressure equipment for which a high-risk work licence is not required. So essentially, Schedule 4 in itself just lists all the pressure equipment where you don't require a licence. It's quite evident. But specifically, there's been an expansion for when a boiler licence is not required. So previously, there was an exception where the licence was not required if the boiler did not exceed 4.6 metres of heating surface, and now in new regulations they've increased that to be 5 metres of heating surface. So if your boiler has 5 or less metres of heating surface, you don't need to hold a licence. So we've been given an extra 0.4 metres in the new regulations.
Or they have been. Yeah, again, I wonder why. You know, there must have been a reason. Perhaps the new generation of boilers are a little bit bigger. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, so more information. Licence for high-risk work application forms can be collected from Australia Post, downloaded from the WorkSafe website, ordered from advisory service. I'm not going to go through all this. This will be available for people to download, but you can get more information.
Yeah. Okay, now hazardous substances. So these are covered under Part 4.1 in Chapter 4. And the main changes have been to make our regs comply with Australia's commitment to adopt the globally harmonised system of classification and labelling of chemicals, the GHS. We'll get to that in a moment. Most other jurisdictions did this when they adopted the national Work Health and Safety Acts and Regs. But of course Victoria hasn't adopted that, and we just wanted to mention that there's other sections to this part. So for example, 4.2 covers scheduled carcinogenic substances, 4.3 covers lead, etc.
And 4.4 asbestos. That's the only etc. So this section covers hazardous substances generally, and then specifically carcinogens, lead and asbestos.
Yeah. Thank you. So first one to point out, a little quick one, there's been changes to the definition of container. Now it's been amended in the new regulations to cover bulk containers exceeding 500 litres or 500 kilos. All right.
Okay, so as Roxy mentioned, the main changes are that Australia made an international commitment some years ago to adopt the globally harmonised scheme for classification and labelling of chemicals. We hope you don't hear the noise in our background because there's a meeting going on next door that's very loud. Okay, so subdivision 2 under 4.1 covers the determination of hazardous substances. The old regs used to refer to the approved criteria for classifying hazardous information, or the Hazardous Substances Information System, HSIS, to determine a hazardous substance. The new regs have replaced these classification systems with the GHS. As a result, all references to the terminology in the approved criteria for classifying hazardous substances and the HSIS have been removed to align with this new terminology and the requirements of the GHS.
Yep.
Okay, AgVet requirements. Now, as I mentioned, Australia gave a commitment to actually take this up, and it's a globally harmonised system, so you can understand the whole world is picking it up, and Australia committed to do that. Now, our chemical system in Australia is actually a dog's breakfast. So while Safe Work Australia and the health and safety regulators look after chemicals in workplaces, the classification and the approval and the registration of chemicals gets done nationally. And the AgVet chemicals, so those that are used in agricultural and veterinary situations, are done by the APVMA, and industrial chemicals are done by NICNAS. Now, the APVMA has for a long time not wanted to adopt the GHS. So basically what this section allows for is it says that the labels and the classification can be accepted if it's an equivalent system.
Yep.
And for the AgVet, they're allowed to have slightly different labels. So they still have to have a number of things. So they still have to have the risk phrases, but they do not have to have the pictograms. And that's the main thing. Now, later we'll show you some one-page docs that will give a bit of a quick resume of what the GHS is, but they still must have to have the hazard statement consistent with the correct classification and any precautionary statement, but not the pictogram.
Okay. Yep. So yeah, we'll show you the pictogram as well at the end. Okay.
So yeah, we can just go on, I think. So what's in the GHS?
So as you can see, it just describes the 5 main components here: signal words, warning or danger, hazard statements that are quite straightforward, causes serious eye irritation, precautionary statements specifically to prevention, response, storage and disposal of chemicals, safety data sheets. So these contain 16 standardized headings.
Should just say that people will know, we'll call them MSDSs, now they're SDSs.
Oh, okay.
So we used to have material safety data sheets under our regs, under the old regs, now they're safety data sheets.
Okay. And now the pictograms. We've got 6 here, there's usually 9. But to find out more info on the GHS, please just check out a couple of the links. And as I mentioned, we will provide the slides to you as well. Now, we've got about 10 minutes left of this. So if I could ask anyone who has a burning question for Renata to answer, please type it here in the chat box. You should be able to see it on a small little icon. And I have messaged you guys. So please bring on some of those questions.
While we're waiting for that, just those last links, and also at the beginning we had a link onto my website where we've done a summary of the main changes that we think people need to know about. Plus, I'm working very slowly through each chapter of the regs.
It's a lot of work.
It's very tedious because, as we said, the changes in numbering are just a pain.
Yeah.
But also by including the self-employed person into the employer means that not every para changes, because obviously a self-employed person doesn't have employees to whom duties are owed, but then a self-employed person has to do a number of other things. So it is, it's very painful actually.
She's doing an excellent job as it's coming. So any more information, please go to the OHS website. And of course, Renata is always there answering questions in general. But while we do have a couple more minutes, it would be great to hear from everyone. If you guys do have some burning questions you'd like to
even not burning questions,
simple questions, basic questions. So you have your little chat box here, and as you can see, I'm just going to send you guys a little message.
Okay, so do employers have to relabel chemicals already? No, but you'll find that if the employers don't have a duty to relabel, it's actually the GHS applies to importers and suppliers, importing suppliers. So you can still, employers can still be using the what they have in the workplace. There is a duty under the section for employers to make sure that they label any chemicals that they decant, unless what they've decanted is going to be used immediately. But that was actually a duty under the previous regs. But now, so they just need to basically mirror what's on the original container. But you'll find that because many countries around the world have already been using the GHS. You'd be surprised to see that a lot of chemicals already in use in Australia have got the GHS compliant labels.
Yeah.
So this has really caught up with us. Now, will the new SDS be available soon? Well, the SDSs, again, under the regulations, an SDS and previously an MSDS had to be reviewed every 5 years, or had to be reviewed if there was a change in any of the in the makeup or the constituents of that product, or if any new information came out. So again, you'll be finding that many of the data sheets that you have in the workplace are probably compliant with GHS already. Do you want to read that next one out?
Am I correct in saying that all SWMs will need to be changed according to the new Act and change things like MSDS to SDS? All right.
Okay, safe work method statements, I think SWMs. Now, you know, they actually appear more in construction and stuff like that. I think what is going to be necessary for employers to do is just to continue doing what they're supposed to be doing anyway, and that is identifying the hazards and implementing controls and having safe systems of work in place. Now, in terms of changes to duties of employers, there hasn't been a great deal of change. So, no, I don't think things have to be rewritten. People will keep saying MSDS for a long time, I think, but people will understand that it's safety data sheets. Now, I've got one there. There's also new equipment regs replacing the plant regs. No, the equipment regs don't replace the plant regs. There are the plant regs in the regs are plant regulations, and I don't know if they'll be covered the next time. I think it depends on whether people are interested in that. The equipment public safety regulations are they're separate, and there's a separate act that actually covers those as well. But I haven't actually looked at them. I know that one of the main things in the plant regs is that they've included chairlifts after the Arthur's seat debacle that people would have been aware of. So chairlifts are specifically covered under our plant regs. And then I think we could probably look at the equipment public safety regs.
So I'll take a poll, as I said, sometime in the week, just to get your feedback on what you do want to be covered in part 2 of the regulations. All right, now we're just going to hear what edition is to be used in Victoria with regards to the
GHS
harmonised system.
Oh, that's a very technical question.
Why is it technical?
Because it is a global scheme. There are different. I mean, I know that with dangerous goods, there's a really big issue about which edition and which. With the GHS, I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure if there are different editions. Loretta may know more than I do, but from what I understand, and this is where perhaps you can have a look at some of the material that's available both on WorkSafe and Safe Work Australia's site, there are links to some of this material. I mean, one of the things that we have done in Australia that is not consistent with the GHS, and that is we don't have on our labels and on our SDSs the environmental information. So I mean, part of this, you know, having sat in some of the meetings nationally at NICNAS and in forums where the AGDEC people were also there, part of what we end up with is what we can get in the face of very stiff opposition and obstruction, I'd say, from sections of the chemical industry.
That's interesting. That's interesting. We don't have the environmental impacts.
Will current MSDSs be required to be reformatted? Look, I'll say that the MSDSs, there should be no MSDS in any workplace that's older than 5 years for a start, because the other jurisdictions implemented the Work Health Safety Act and the regs several years ago now. I would be surprised if any new chemical coming in, or if you called the supplier of your products or got the employer to say, we've still got this that says MSDS and it's not compliant with the GHS SDS.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah.
I would be very surprised if they don't have it.
Yeah, because I think it was 2011 and 2013 when most of the other states came and joined the model. So, yeah, that's quite a few years to come through.